Welcome to another issue. I think this is week 7 or 8 now of You Can Sit With Us, which is a weekly series presented by myself, Jyoty, and every week I have a new speaker who I believe is someone that you should pay attention to, listen to, at least be inspired by, because they dedicate their 9 to 5s and usually also the time after that, their 5 to 12, to fighting the good fight, whether that means in education, in law, in politics, in policy, or just other social environments where they try to make a change for you and I. And what we also want to do with these series is just give you a seat at the table. So we discuss topics that maybe normally you feel a little bit intimidated by, or you feel like you don't understand, or you feel like you're kind of cornered into having a certain opinion or feeling a certain way about it. And what we try to do is different things, everything from educating, little workshops, or just providing you with the tools, which is usually in the form of information for you to make your own decisions and form your own opinions. And today we are joined by the creator and the CEO of Naked Politics. I'm not going to tell you what that is. Banseka.
Hi, you're right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. I'm glad our paths cross in such a quick, like literally I saw you on Instagram and I just looked at what you were doing. I clicked on the website and I thought, oh my God, she's perfect.
That was real quick. You secured that very quickly. I was impressed.
I have no ego when it comes to these things. When I think someone does great work, I have to let you know, and you need to get it. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to let you first start off by explaining to people, to us, who you are and what you do and what Naked Politics is all about, the platform, organization, educational institution that you've created. And from there, we're actually going to delve into your work outside of that, your writing, which you're also going to give like a mini tips and tricks, mini workshop for people who are interested in writing, and also your work extending outside of the website that is Naked Politics with Mixed Race Faces.
Yeah, sounds really good.
So I'm going to mute myself and let you take it away. And as soon as I have a question, you will see, you will know, you will hear.
Cool. So obviously I run Naked Politics. Naked Politics is an organization which is aiming to engage young people in politics. So politics is kind of like this traditional entity which really doesn't reach out to lots of groups of people, but certainly young people as well. There's a huge gap between politicians who are over here and who are kind of doing their own thing and enacting legislation and doing all these things that impact young people. And then you've kind of got young people on the other side, and the two don't really cross over. And it's not really young people's fault, it's kind of politicians' fault, right? And also other institutions that are part of the kind of Westminster style like politics, so the media, for example, as well. Basically, the conversations that we have around politics are kind of stale, they're kind of boring, they're not really tailored towards young people. And that's essentially what Naked Politics is. It's trying to bridge that gap and find a way to make politics accessible to young people, meaningful, make them feel a part of it as well, because I think a huge part of that gap is just them feeling like it's got nothing to do with them, and also trying to bridge that gap between politicians specifically as well, who ultimately hold the power to create a lot of positive change in society. So we amplify young people's voices. We have lots of young people who write for us, who get to have their say. So we're really kind of like putting them at the forefront of what we do. And then on top of that as well, we're also doing some stuff in real life. I say real life, it's going to be like virtual for now, given the coronavirus situation, that we're going to be working hopefully with the universities as well. So we've got a project coming up with Queen Mary that we're going to roll out to try and engage their apathetic young students as well, and kind of give them the tools that they need to understand politics, understand the basics, understand the practicalities as well. Like, how do you actually go about changing something if you want to? So giving them that knowledge, giving them that power, and also giving them the power to hold politicians to account and actually bringing politicians to them as well. So yeah, that's what we're all about. We amplify young people's views. We want to engage with them. We want to support them, make them feel valued. You know, that's what we're about and what we're aiming to do.
And can I ask you, when did this start? How did this idea come about? And more importantly, probably for a lot of young people listening, how did you get it from an idea in your head to what it is now? Like, what logistical steps did you have to take?
So when I initially started Naked Politics, so I'm 27 now, I'm going to be 28 in 7 days. So I'm 27 now. I started Naked Politics when I was 22, just about to turn 23. If I'm honest, like I started it and I just did it, right? Like, and I'm a big fan of saying to people, like, obviously think about what you're doing first, but sometimes you just need to do stuff as well. Otherwise you'll be agonizing for ages about like, how do I do this properly, or how do I do this exactly the right way? So for me, like as a 22-year-old, I could feel very keenly that there was nothing there for young people. And it was even worse than it is now. Like these days, at least, we've got a few more kind of like out there platforms that we've seen. You know, we've seen the rise of stuff like, you know, Galdem, for example, which caters towards young, to women of colour and non-binary people of colour, for example. That was a space where there was a huge vacuum, and other platforms as well. But particularly when I was like fresh out of uni, there was nothing. Politics, if you wanted to learn about politics, you had to read The Guardian or the Daily Mail, or you had to watch BBC News, and all these things were just not curated for us. And so, yeah, I just created it totally on a whim. I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot planned after I was graduating. So I was like, I'll move back in with my parents and I'll just start this blog. And yeah, it just filed on from there, to be fair. Like, it was a mad, like, chunk suddenly for politics. Like, politics went from being something really boring to suddenly, like, Jeremy Corbyn was elected a leader of the Labour Party, and everyone was like, whoa. And then we had all the stuff with the referendum and us voting to leave the European Union. And then we had like another election, and we had an election last year. So like politics has kind of like been mad as well, which has definitely always also helped us. But yeah, I really just started it out with a really basic website, really terrible actually, with a logo that was really badly designed as well. And I just started it and went from there, to be honest, and found other young people, like-minded young people who just wanted to write and wanted to say things too. And it kind of just snowballed from there. Obviously, since then, it's got a bit more sophisticated, and I've worked a bit more widely with other people and done like proper design work, so it looks a bit more slick and stuff like that. And then I've learned a lot and grown a lot along the way as well, in terms of my understanding of what good journalism is, who we are, what we want to do beyond just writing. Because when we first started out, it really was just a platform to write. That was all I knew. I just knew that I was a writer, and that was that. And it's obviously grown a lot more since then, but we just really started out just on a whim. Like, I think I thought about it for a month and pulled a few bits together, and then we just did it. And I'm a big fan of saying to people, like, just do it. If it's wrong, you'll find out sooner or later.
I think this is so true. The big difference between people who we perceive to be successful in whatever they do and us who would like to do the same thing is the other person just went for it.
Yeah.
And very often you don't even know how many times they've quote unquote failed, or it didn't go as they had planned, before you see the fruits of their labor and the success stories. It has to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. It has to start somewhere, and you might as well start it now and see where you get to. And like, you do learn a lot just along the way, I have to say. Like, you'll learn a lot from, you know, other people, from working. You know, I've worked with copious amounts of different people through my website at any one time, and I've learned something different from each of them. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, but you always learn, right? So like, getting up and just doing it. And like, I think young people these days, like, we've got this like amazing sick opportunity that like the generations before us didn't have, but we can just get up and make stuff. Like, you can just get up and make a podcast, you can create, you know, social media platforms and channels that have thousands of followers. You know, you can create a YouTube channel. You know, you can make news. You can do a lot of this stuff, right? Which is in a much better position than before, generations before us. So I feel like we need to take advantage of that technology, and really curate the world that we want to see and we want to live in.
Question that you might not, have an answer to, but I'd like your opinion. What do you think we as young people can do, or maybe should do, or you'd like to see people do in order for these smaller platforms? Because it's true, there's a lot of platforms now popping up everywhere, left, right, and center, where, you know, our voices, which is like what is considered majority ideas and ideals are being vocalized, but they still seem to be quite small and quite underground and quite niche. And what needs to happen in order for those voices to ever come even close to the major media outlets and be heard and seen more, and not just because very often you do see, platforms like Galdem and Vice, and it's amazing. We need it 100%. But often we are hearing and reading stories that we have lived and experienced already. And how can we get those narratives to those who haven't experienced that? What do you think needs to happen?
That's a really good question, to be honest. And I think what I would say is, first of all, I think as young people, we need to make sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is. So if there's any journalism, for example, that, can you still see me, by the way, and hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Oh, okay, my screen's gone blank, but I might just keep going if you can still hear me.
I can see you and I can hear you.
Okay, as long as you can see me, then that's the main thing. I don't need to see me. Okay, cool. So yeah, I would say putting our money where our mouth is. So making sure that we're willing to support those other platforms, and not just in terms of how we consume that information that they provide, but that we're also willing to pay for it as well. And make sure that we're taking our money out of, reading stuff that maybe we don't like the Daily Mail, for example, might be a good example of the type of media outlet that doesn't necessarily reflect the views of young people or how young people see the world. I don't know how many young people buy the Daily Mail, but I'm sure there are lots of people who still consume the Daily Mail online, for example, and even just a click on there is going to give them money. I also think we probably need to do more to work together and organize as well, because there's lots of platforms out there. Some of them are small and niche. Ours is still relatively small, for example, and some of them are bigger. But I think we need to do a lot more to kind of cross over lots of those different platforms and work together with kind of a singular voice, I suppose, for young people as well. Because then again, that has a bigger reach and reaches more people. I do think with a lot of mainstream media, the print newspapers, they're kind of already dying anyway. I don't foresee a long future for a lot of those newspapers. A lot of them aren't really able to survive. So I do think they're kind of dying a natural death. But I guess the worry is whether or not they'll end up being replaced by something better. And I think we need to make sure that we're creating our own platforms, that we're linking up together, and that we're also putting our money where our mouth is and subscribing to the content that we really love, to make sure that those more positive platforms, those more positive media outlets can continue to exist and flourish and get bigger and grow a bigger voice, and the ones that maybe we don't will hopefully die a slow death.
Amen. Not to be rude, but it's time for a change. I think that's really, really, really important and valuable that you're saying. We need to work together more. I think, one thing I've learned over the last few years is that we are always fighting each other on our side of the fence.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on fighting people on the other side of the fence. Very often when we look at us and them, they don't care about their differences. All they care about is who is their common enemy. What we on our side tend to think is, what is the better way to be a Democrat, feminist, anti-racist? And we're so focused on fighting each other and saying how you're not meant to do something, that we completely lose focus on, hang on, why don't we come together, join forces?
Yeah,
all different ways, in the creative field, in the educational field, politically, everyday life. It's there's more of us than there is more of them.
100%. And one of the best lessons that I've learned through Black Lives Matter, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but one of the best things that I've learned has been that it's not necessarily about personalizing racism in the fight for anti-racism. It's about working together and organizing and having common goals, or working together to to demand structural change and institutional change. So it's not necessarily about individuals, and what individual people can do, although some individual people can create great change. It's about what we can achieve together. And I think it's very much the same with this kind of like digital online media journalism world as well. Like, you know, there's a lot more we can achieve together to create a world that really, you know, has good journalism and supports young people and other neglected demographics as well, if we work together, and if platforms are willing to work together to achieve this. So there's just so much more we can achieve by working together. And I guess that's one of the reasons why with Naked Politics, like, I'm keen to work with universities. Like, I want to work with those institutions to be able to provide young people with, you know, support and, you know, love essentially and care when it comes to politics. You know, if we work together, we can do a lot of stuff. But it's just a question of like everyone being willing to do that and make those connections.
Absolutely. Actually, you mentioned Black Lives Matter briefly. What I also want to talk about is, outside of Naked Politics, you also just write a lot on other topics, more like intersectional conversations about race and gender. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, I feel like I've always written about race. I've been writing, I guess, since I was 22, 23, about the same time I started Naked Politics, back when no one probably read anything I wrote. But yeah, no, so I've written a lot about race. I've written a lot about race, a lot of the time from quite a practical point of view. I've only kind of got more personal in the last kind of year or so when I've explored my own heritage. But a lot of the time, a lot of the writing I've done around race and feminism has been very practical, particularly around race, where I'm like, this is what I need white people to do. This is what you guys need to do. This is what you guys need to understand. So yeah, I get a lot of satisfaction, I suppose, out of writing that stuff, because I feel like it needs to be said. But then at the same time, I suppose, is someone who's not serious about being anti-racist going to read what I've got to write anyway? Possibly not. Maybe I'm just preaching to the choir. But I've written a lot about race, racism, quite a bit about sexism and feminism. And I like to do it quite a lot through the lens of like pop culture, just because I feel like it makes these conversations more accessible, and a little bit less dry. So, you know, if we're going to have a conversation about feminism and it's come up in Love Island, why not talk about it? Why not talk about colorism through Love Island, for example, or whatever reality TV show is on at the moment? Like, why not talk about Black female sexuality through Beyonce or Cardi B, if that's what makes things more interesting for people? So yeah, I've done a lot to kind of mix those important issues with popular culture together. And again, it's a way of trying to get people to see the links and make this stuff important and relevant to people as well. So that's been the kind of the body of my writing. In the last year or year and a half, I've written some more personal stuff. So I've explored my own mixed heritage background. So my dad is Congolese African and my mum is Punjabi Indian. So I'm mixed heritage. And I kind of wanted to do quite a bit of exploring about what that meant, randomly about a year and a half ago. When I first started with a platform called Mixed Race Faces, who I'm sure you'll ask me about later. But yeah, so I've also started to do some more personal pieces exploring who am I, what does it mean for me to be mixed heritage, what does that mean for other people, and kind of exploring, is mixed race, is it even real? I've had conversations with people who've told me, you know, being a race is not real, so there's no such thing as being mixed race, which was really, really interesting as well. And I've reflected on what that's meant for me too. So yeah, in the last kind of like year and a half, I've written some more personal stuff. I also wrote, just after all the George Floyd stuff kind of really hit the fan, I wrote a really personal piece as well about what it was like for me growing up in a really white suburban town. So from the age of 5 to about 18, I grew up in a tiny little seaside town in the county of Suffolk called Felixstowe. And I had a long reflection about how that probably impacted my self-esteem, and how I see myself as a person, and the reality being that actually it hurts your self-esteem so bad that you probably never 100% fully recover. And I got a lot of messages from people from similar backgrounds to me who've grown up in similar circumstances who said they felt very much the same, which is really heartbreaking. So yeah, but it's cathartic for me, at least, to be able to write that down, and also so that people can understand like how much racism and these types of things really do affect people and affect people for the rest of their lives. So yeah, my writing now is often a little bit more personal. It's got a little bit more of me in it, but it feels good to do that, and there's a real catharsis, I think, in me being able to let go of some of that stuff through my writing.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite, well, you're literally processing your feelings, your thoughts, your experiences, your traumas by writing it off of you, I guess. I was thinking, because obviously we had a conversation before today, just to see who you are, what you're about, and everything you do. And actually, the next kind of section I want to get into is probably where you're going to give more tips for people who are listening who also want to write personal pieces, because that is becoming more and more popular. We see it happen on social media a lot. And I said this to you as well, a lot of big platforms and media outlets are actually reaching out to non-traditional writers to actually write about their experiences of topics that are now very relevant. And actually, I was watching another episode of I May Destroy You, and obviously the character in that series has a similar kind of experience, from very active on social media and Twitter to then writing a book about, a millennial girl that did really well, getting a deal for another book without a traditional education into writing, but doing really well because people relate to her and see something of themselves in her and her writing. I guess what I want to ask you are some tips and tricks or things that people should look out for or be aware of, or maybe shouldn't do or think or feel when stepping into or exploring the world of writing from a personal perspective.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I would say, really think about it before just doing it. I know I'm just contradicting myself because I said before, just do it.
But explain what you mean by just do it versus but really think about it.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to writing about personal stuff, I think you need to be sure that this is something that you really want to put out there, because obviously once it's out there, it's going to be out there forever, isn't it? You can't recall articles that you've submitted to places and then have been published. You can't scrub the internet suddenly clean of your personal stories. And, these things are personal and these things are difficult. It's not always easy. It's always painful, I think, for me to reflect on some of the historical trauma, for example, that has happened in my family, with my mum's father not being very happy. My mum, who's Indian, by the way, her father was not happy at all that she married a black man, and their relationships never the same, for example. So for me to reveal that and talk about that is quite a big thing, and it's also quite a big thing for my family as well, because it also means that information is out there about them. So I would just say always take a step to think okay, do I definitely want to share this with people? I think it can be an amazing cathartic moment, and for me it's felt really great to be able to write about these things and talk about these things, because you get to stimulate conversations with people and make people think about things that they might not normally think about, but just always take a beat, I think, in terms of thinking, do I definitely want to do this or not? Because as I said, once it's out there, it's out there. And then in terms of the practicalities of writing this kind of stuff, I'd say think about what is it about you or your experiences that are particularly unique or interesting. So have a think about that. Sometimes if it's something too generic or too well trodden, publishers, or platforms might not really bite into it. So make sure that it's definitely something that you think is there's a bit of a unique angle there or something you can bring to it. I'd say the actual process of finding platforms, have a good research. You should already be familiar, I suppose, somewhat, if you're interested in writing in the platforms that you enjoy reading. Have a really good research, because there are loads of platforms out there, and I'm still continually surprised when random platforms I've never heard of come up and they're accepting submissions and they want people to write for them. So make sure you do your research. You keep a good log, a nice spreadsheet, not very sexy, I know, but a good spreadsheet of all that information, including the right contacts for each of those publications as well. You know, there's no point emailing, I don't know, the editor for like technology on a platform when you're writing a personalized feature. And so you need to make sure that you're also contacting the right person. Otherwise, your pitch probably just won't be answered, and they'll never get back to you. I'd also say as well, like in terms of hunting for places to be able to get published, it's really helpful. I've found it really helpful to just join like Facebook groups. So there's loads of like writing Facebook groups out there, particularly ones that are identity based as well. So there's quite a few BME ones out there. I'm sure there's some queer platforms out there as well, where like opportunities will regularly be posted, where, you know, journalists will often, or media platforms will often be like, you know, we're looking for someone to talk about X, Y, and Z. So I secured a really interesting piece of work writing for a teenage magazine, to talk about some of my experiences around race and racism, and then give some practical advice about what young people should be doing to try and, you know, challenge white supremacy, for example. And I just found that through a Facebook group. Someone just posted in there. So joining those Facebook type groups, those networks, can be really, really good. Yeah, and then the last bit really is the actual pitch itself.
I was going to ask you about that. I noticed you mentioned the word pitch, and I thought, well, how does one pitch for being published? What can you explain for people who don't even know what a pitch means? Because I guess it's something that occurs in many industries, but if you've never done it or have had to do it before, you wouldn't know what a pitch is.
Sure, I'm probably talking in jargon now because like I'm just used to using these words all the time. But yeah, that's a really good question. So a pitch is basically you coming to an editor and basically giving an outline of what you would like to write about. And obviously you can pitch on different things. So if you want to create like a video series or a documentary, I'm sure there are, you know, different types of media you can pitch for. But that's what a pitch is. And generally speaking, you shouldn't be sending like full pieces of writing to any editor. You need to really be sending them a pitch, giving them an outline so that they can then say yes or no, possibly not reply. That does sometimes happen. But yeah, so they can kind of give you the go ahead and say, okay, this piece sounds good, we want you to write this. And once they've said yes, that's known as a commission. So they've commissioned you to do that piece of work. So yeah, it's all a bit jargony, but that's what a pitch is. And your pitch is really, really important. So you need to make sure, first of all, that you don't make your pitch like overwhelmingly long. As someone who also runs a platform and who's spent many many hours looking at pitches, because that's also how we commission work for us as well. You know, if you get a pitch that's like an A4 page long, like that's way too long, and it's really like off-putting as an editor to look at that. So it'll probably just scare a lot of people off. So make sure that your pitch is really concise. Ideally, I would say you kind of want like 2 or 3 lines, just giving a really brief summary of what it is, and possibly maybe any links to similar work that you've done. And then what I like to do is I like to do just a few bullet points, probably 3, 4 maybe, breaking down the kind of general structure of what the piece will cover. So talking about, you know, whether I'm going to use my personal experiences or not, talking about if I'm going to possibly interview other people as well as part of the piece, which is something that I do quite a lot now and really adds a nice sense of depth and richness to your piece if you can get other perspectives, either from other, you know, ordinary people with ordinary experiences, or if you can get, you know, expert opinions as well. That's really, really cool. So yeah, outlining the general structure, the general points that you're going to make, and possibly how you're going to conclude things as well. I think it's also good to put like a rough idea of like how many words you think it's going to be. Generally speaking, I'd say for most publications, you're looking at between 800 to 1,000 words for a piece generally. It's probably not going to be a lot more than that, and it's certainly not going to be a lot less. So yeah, that's a pitch really. And yeah, keeping it short, keeping it simple. And also I would say one of the key things as well that you really should include in a pitch is, particularly if you're doing like personal pieces, is why am I the right person to write this? Like, what is it about me that means that someone like me makes sense for me to write about this? You know, so for example, obviously that might mean you bringing in, you know, your personal experiences. So I literally just wrote a piece for Bustle UK, which is like a women's platform about anti-blackness in the South Asian community. And the piece isn't really about me. I've interviewed a series of other people to explore it as part of kind of the ongoing conversations we're having about Black Lives Matter. But obviously the a key hook in terms of me saying to them, I really want to write this piece, was because of my own family history and background, and me being both Black and Indian.
Yeah.
So the piece is really about me, but it was enough of a hook for me to be like, I've got this experience, I would like to write about this as well. So thinking about you and what your USP in this is can also be helpful. You don't have to do that all the time, but I find that's normally quite a nice little hook in to really get them interested. And you know, it's also, once you start writing, like the more you start writing, the more editors will become familiar with you, familiar with your work. And the more you start to build up a relationship with them, and the easier and easier it is sometimes to pitch stuff. And you also sometimes get to a nice place where editors get to know you, and they'll even be pinging work to you and asking you, like, we want someone to write about this, can you? So yeah, that's kind of the basics of a pitch. Don't be afraid as well to be rejected, because that's the world of writing and journalism, freelance work. Like you're competing for work with other people, and that's just the reality of it. So yeah, don't get too disheartened if it takes a while. Sometimes people taking your pictures. I've been rejected countless times but I don't know how many different platforms, and that's just the way it is. And you kind of just got to keep pushing through that and stay resilient, you know, and remember, like, it's never that you're wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's never that there's something you or you can't write. It's just maybe the idea isn't quite right. So always keep that in mind as well.
So good pitch essentially is how to sell yourself and your story to someone, basically.
100%.
That actually, you mentioned something just now that leads me to another question. Also, we are halfway through, just so you're aware. And if you've just tuned in and you think, this all sounds really interesting, but I have no idea who these people are and what they're talking about, you're listening to a new episode of You Can Sit With Us, a weekly series where we speak to what I consider to be real life heroes who live amongst us and who are active in their everyday life, whether that's work or outside of work, in some sort of activism, whether that's in education, in healthcare, politics, policymaking, writing, arts, you name it. And we just want to give you some information and tools to include you in conversations that you maybe thought you were never going to be included in, or to just give you some information for you to form your own opinions and decide how you feel, what you feel about everyday topics that you take part in. And today we're talking about politics and journalism, what to do, what not to do, or just, you know, personal experiences from Banseka's journey, who is the founder of Naked Politics, but also writes outside of that, and is also involved with a platform called Mixed Race Spaces, which we will also get to after I ask you. You just mentioned, you know, the rejections. So now, what if you've already written a piece, right? So you could be commissioned to write something. So you're given a brief, which is kind of a, you know, an assignment. But what if you've already written a piece that you really think is great and you would want to see it on a platform, and you just keep hearing no, no, no? In 2020, where we have so much access to so many things, what does one do to get the story out there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I would say, like, always keep trying and keep plugging like different places that you think might be interested. It's easy to give up after like a few tries because it is demotivating, and I don't care what anyone says, like, no one likes rejection. No one. And we all know
absolutely not. And people need to stop saying, oh, you know, because I think it's important that we do tell everyone, you know, whether that's in music or in writing or journalism, doesn't matter. It's so easy for us to always say, oh, I've been rejected so many times. But it's so important that we also say, and I hated it. And it made me so sad. And it made me so insecure. And that, I think, is even more valuable than we get it. Yes, you're going to get rejected. But can we please hear from everybody that you felt horrible when you got rejected?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It is really important to vocalize that. You know, one of the things that I've written about before as well has been like this whole thing on like social media where obviously like it's just a show reel of like our best us having the best time of our lives, right? And we're securing this and we're doing that and we're getting our coins or whatever. But obviously like we don't show those moments of rejection, we don't really show those moments of real vulnerability. And I think you're right, it's really important in these conversations that we do talk about rejection. You know, I've applied, for example, for funding for Naked Politics a couple of times now, and we've had knockbacks, and we haven't had anyone who's willing to give us grant funding yet. And that hurts, like it always does, even though it doesn't mean that your idea isn't a good idea, doesn't mean that someone won't give you money in the future or whatever, but it still hurts in that moment, and we have to acknowledge it. And I think it is important to try and vocalize it to other people as well, you know, otherwise we all just think we're living in this world where everyone else is getting everything that they want and you're the only one that is being rejected and really like feels it. So yeah, like always give yourself, you know, space and time and love to kind of sit with those feelings and not tell yourself that, oh, I'm not allowed to feel sad because I got a rejection email today. Like definitely allow yourself to feel that, because you know you have every right to feel that way. But just know that there's someone out there who probably would love to have your idea. So make sure that once you're ready and you're able to gather your thoughts again, that you keep pushing that out there. And then I guess what I would say is, ultimately, if you can't find anywhere else to host what you're talking about or what you've written about, you know, I still think there's a real power in having your own platform. And I know it's easy for me to sit here and say that, oh, just create your own platform, but I do think it's a good idea for any aspiring writer to always just start out with their own platform. It doesn't have to be, you know, what we've done with Naked Politics, where we've obviously got lots of contributors and it's quite a big affair now. But you know, it can just be like, even if it's just a personal blog, where you just write up your thoughts, you know. So if worst comes to worst and you can't find anywhere to publish it, you know, you can always publish it on your own platform and keep that platform growing. And keep a nice portfolio of work on there, which is always really handy and really useful sometimes to be able to show, you know, other media outlets that you're pitching to that you are capable of writing, before you're able to maybe secure that space in mainstream media.
Absolutely. And then my last question before we move on to the next subject of our conversation today: how and when do you know if you should get paid or can ask for pay for what you're writing?
That's a really good question, actually. And there's kind of no cut and dry answer for this, right? Like, so for me, like the first year or so that I was writing, I actually didn't get paid anything. And I wrote for like big publications. Sorry, I don't mean to throw like Huffington Post under the bus, but like they were letting people write for them for free for a long time, and I was one of those people, right? And I wrote stuff that, you know, got them like a lot of views and stuff like that, and I never saw any money from it. It's really difficult because I look back at that time and I'm like, I needed a portfolio of work. I needed a portfolio of writing, and I almost needed that confidence boost of believing like, like actually like my writing is good enough to be published by a mainstream platform. Like I'm not just making this up in my head that I'm a good writer. Like my writing is more than publishable. But I think these days we're in a slightly better position. I think there's a lot more pressure on media platforms now to be paying people, and not to be doing kind of free work. So I don't think it's anywhere near as regular occurrence as it used to be. What I would say is, like, if you are going to do free work, and full disclosure, at the moment Naked Politics doesn't pay our writers either, so we also rely on volunteers and young people volunteering their time as well. I think one of the things that we try to do is, I certainly with my writers, I try to kind of really give them a network that's useful, you know, where they can kind of work together with writers, where they can get, you know, proper like help and assistance on improving their writing and making their writing better. But we also try and I also try and widen out other opportunities and paid opportunities as much as possible to journalism or other areas of work as well that people are interested in. Obviously, we have young people who are very interested in politics writing for us too, and I try and like make sure to give them opportunities in other ways as well. But I would certainly say, like, you should make sure at the very least, if you're writing for free, that publication is going to be, you know, pushing you and your name out there on social media channels, pushing the articles that you're running, you know, that they're willing to host, you know, a little bio maybe about you, or host like your Twitter handle or whatever when they publish your article, so it's giving you some exposure. Like, you need to be able to get something out of it, rather than just them having got everything out of you, if that makes sense.
So some sort of exchange of currency.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be monetary, but
Yeah.
there has to be something. Like, they have to give you something. I don't think it's good enough, really, for any platform to be able to just be like, you need to write for free and you can't expect anything from us. Like, you have to get something from it, and you're fully within your rights once you reach a point where you're like, right, I need to be paid now.
Yeah.
I can't afford to write for free. That you withdraw from those platforms. And yeah, anyone who said that to me with Naked Politics, well, we're not able to pay people right now, I would fully accept that and be like, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Like, I completely appreciate and understand that. So it's about knowing what you can get from it, and knowing when you're going to reach that point where you're like, okay, I actually just really need money now. I need to get paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and then that's a difficult thing. It's not an easy thing to, valuing yourself is really hard, especially when you're young. Like, no one tells you what you're worth. You don't know what like an 800-word article is worth. Who knows, right? And even now, like, when I get paid for stuff, there'll be various different things where, I'll do, a really small amount of work for one publication and get paid a lot more, and then do a much bigger piece of work for someone else and then get paid a lot less. And I'm like, so valuing yourself is sometimes really, really difficult. But as you get older and you get more experience, you start to understand the market a little bit more, and you can also kind of negotiate a little bit, or haggle a little bit as well, which I have also done when I've been asked to do social media work, for example. And I was commissioned for a certain amount, and then they asked me to do more work on top of that, and I said, well, you're going to have to pay me more.
Yeah.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there with negotiating, but you kind of have to be ballsy. You have to know your worth. This is where networks really come in handy, by the way, as well, because it means that you can speak to other people about what they're also being paid for in terms of similar work. So it means there's more transparency in the kind of writing and journalism community, where like, oh, okay, well, the Independent paid me 100, but they paid you 150. What is that? Then you've got that knowledge, and you can kind of leverage things out a little bit that way too. And those informal networks, I think, are where that kind of stuff becomes really important.
Yeah, really valuable advice. I think that's really helpful and applicable to different industries as well. Let's get to, because I definitely want you to talk to us about mixed race faces. Tell me, what is it? You already gave a little bit of an introduction of why and how, but what is it?
Yeah, so mixed race faces, shout out to them. So what they are is they are a platform that is trying to highlight the diverse stories and experiences of mixed heritage people. So it's really, really simple. Like, they've got a really simple idea, which is basically that they bring in a kind of collection of mixed heritage people at a time, people who vary in all kinds of different heritages as well, not just your traditional black and white, which is, I think, what many people think of when we talk about mixed race. There's all kinds of, amazing mixtures of different cultures. And basically what they do is they kind of get you to write out a story through a series of questions that you answer, which kind of prompts your personal story. And the story will cover things, for example, like, your cultural heritage in terms of food, in terms of what you wear, in terms of how you feel, in terms of your dating relationships, and all this kind of stuff, and really get you to explore your mixed heritageness and how it's impacted you and what you feel like that means. And then, yeah, they published the story alongside a very beautiful portrait of yourself, which is also taken by them, by a wonderful photographer working with them. And that's it, basically. So that's the kind of simple idea of it. I came across them, like most things, on Instagram. And I just DM'd them and was like, oh, I really want to take part in this. Not really thinking much about what that meant. And yeah, they sent me the questionnaire, and I started filling out the questions, and just kind of had like a weird epiphany where I was like, I really haven't given this much thought actually at all. Like, certainly, like, before I was involved with them, I think I've been socialized as black, which to me still makes sense. Obviously I look black, I'm treated as a black woman, but obviously I've still got ties to my mum's Indian side, and I'm very close to my mum's mum as well, my grandma, and she's a Sikh Punjabi woman, and so she's got all this heritage, beautiful heritage with her as well. that she's also passed onto me. So I was kind of like, oh, what does it mean? Like, I look black and I'm categorized as black, and I love being black. But I've also got this extra piece as well. So yeah, the experience was really, really great, because it was really an opportunity for me to explore my identity and understand who I was. And I think that's something fundamental to everyone, even if you're not mixed heritage. Everyone wants to know who they are, right? Everyone wants to have an understanding of, this is me. So I was kind of going through an iteration of that, really, when it came to my racial heritage. And yeah, so that same year that I did mixed race spaces, I was one of their participants. They started working with organizations as well. So they wanted to do what they were doing, not just with individual random participants, but to go to an organization and do the same thing, like look at their staff and get their staff to tell their story as well about being mixed heritage, and use that as a platform to be able to have wider conversations about diversity and inclusion, and getting organizations to reflect on something we know that people are very uncomfortable with, which is race. No one wants to talk about race. It's very difficult to talk about race a lot of the time, I find. So it was kind of a really interesting, engaging way of doing that. So I brought them into my workplace. So I work full time in UK Parliament as well. Anyone who knows anything about Parliament knows that it's kind of old school as an institution. It's a little bit, there's lots of great things about it, but there's also lots of things about it that are a little bit backwards. And it is an institution that we can't get away from the fact that it is institutionally racist, in the same way that many other institutions in this country are, right? So yeah, I brought them in, and we worked really hard together to find, I think we had about 12 or 13 participants in the end, who we all kind of like interviewed to get their stories, including 2 MPs, which was really, really great. Had a great conversation with the MP, Clive Lewis in particular, who recommended one of the books that I'm going to recommend to you guys about race and the idea of whether race is even real. And yeah, it was really, really great, actually. And we received a really great response, and it was just really fantastic to shake the table a little bit, I guess, in Parliament, and get people to think about these things and consider these issues that they wouldn't normally touch with a barge pole. And I suppose be able to do it in a way that's very accessible and a bit more easygoing. I think now there's much harder conversations to be had, especially with the rise of Black Lives Matter, and a real scrutiny on the actual really, really hard work that needs to be done, in particular with eliminating anti-Blackness. But it was a campaign that I was really proud of, because we were able to really kind of stimulate interesting discussions around what it means to be mixed heritage. And we also built a little community of people who were mixed, who all kind of had like certain things in common, and felt certain ways that were quite similar, which was really, really interesting as well. Like, most mixed heritage people, for example, feel like they have to pick a side, or feel like they have to embody one side more than the other, for example, and stuff like that. And so yeah, it was really, really great, actually. And it's just nice, obviously, to like meet people who have similar experiences to you.
Absolutely. I can only imagine. I think, I grew up I'm born and raised in Amsterdam, which is a country, and especially if you go to the big cities, you will come across, everyone in Amsterdam looks racially ambiguous, and that's often celebrated. What a lot of people tend to overlook is that the reason why they look racially ambiguous is quite an unpleasant story, because this is all of the colonies that the Netherlands used to have, from Indonesia and the Moluccan Islands to the, Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, Suriname,
Until recently, actually, like until I went to Amsterdam this time last year, I hadn't realised they had been involved that much in colonisation. I was quite surprised. With
1/3 of the world.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know it was that big. Wow.
The 17th century was taught to us in school as the golden era of trade, but it was actually the era where they literally took over the whole world. But even places like, New York was owned by the Dutch. It was called New Amsterdam, and it was sold to the British for 25 guilders. And so I think I am unlearning how I feel about the term mixed race, because I think growing up in the Netherlands in the 90s and in the 2000s, being full Indian, but looking like I could potentially be mixed, and always being approached and asked about whether I'm mixed race in an almost fetishizing way,
Yeah.
has now, at my grown age, I left some sort of bitter taste in my mouth when people ask me, because very often I was asked whether I was mixed race, almost in a matter of complimenting, like, oh, you're fully Indian. I wouldn't have said, because usually Indian girls, they don't have your features. And
Yeah.
when you're young, you're almost like it's a compliment. And when you're young, you take it as a compliment, and then you grow older and you learn about your heritage and you learn about the world, and you
Yeah.
think, hey, why should I feel good about not looking fully Indian? Maybe I do want to look fully Indian. And what does looking Indian mean?
Yeah. And I think that's definitely something I had to learn as well. Like, I had that experience when I like first got to university, which was probably the first time I was in like a more multicultural space. And like I could tell, like, I'd never experienced this before, but you could tell like the black women who were lighter skinned or who looked more mixed race, looked more ambiguous, were obviously seen as like better, and it was seen as like a compliment if you looked mixed race compared to like if you were quote full black. And like, you get all kinds of compliments like, oh, your hair is really nice, you've got such good hair.
The
And every black
texture of your hair, it's such a big thing.
and every black woman knows what it means when someone tells you you've got good hair. That means you've got hair that looks like white people's hair. um
It's
so yeah,
non-black hair.
yeah, and you've got to, as an adult, you kind of got to start unlearning a lot of that stuff. And it was weird because like embracing my mixed heritageness, I also didn't want to do that thing of trying to step away from my blackness. So it was like this tightrope that I was walking where I was like, I want to know more about my Indian heritage because I'm proud of it. But at the same time, like, I don't want to feel like I'm ever stepping away from my blackness or I'm removing myself from my blackness. And if I'm honest, to this day, if someone referred to me as black, I would absolutely not correct them. I would never be like, oh no, I'm mixed race. Like, I would never do that. I would be like, yeah, I'm happy with that label. And, I would probably be lying if I said I felt 50-50. I don't. I feel much closer to my blackness and I feel a sense of kinship to my blackness compared to my Indian side. Not to say I don't care about my Indian side, but I have a very special connection to my blackness, and that's kind of where I've ended up through this through this journey of exploring my identity.
Very important, I think. And I think it's really valuable that you verbalize that, because there's so many people growing up feeling like they can't say that they maybe have more of an affinity or a special bond with one of the two constructs, because
Yeah,
you're human. Like, how are you not going to have that?
yeah, and it's also like it's a social construct thing, right? Like blackness means something not because it inherently means anything, but because all these social constructs around what it means to be black. So I don't want to push away from my blackness because black people have gone through such a struggle that I don't want to distance myself from it. I want to be extra proud of my blackness because we've been made as black people to feel so terrible about our blackness. You know what I mean? And there's not quite that same dynamic with my Indian side, although of course Indian people have been very oppressed as well. So that it'd be great in a perfect world to say, oh yeah, I feel 50-50 or race doesn't matter. But in reality, we live in a world where race is a social construct, but it does matter. It is there because we've made it so.
Yeah.
So therefore, I have to articulate that I feel closer to my black side,
Yeah.
and that there's a special connection there.
And by doing so, I feel like, and this is me saying this as an Indian person,
Yeah,
by doing so, you're contributing to anti-blackness within our Indian community,
yeah,
and we need that now more than ever. I think now is the time. We've all like had conversations at home, uncomfortable conversations in the last few months, especially during Black Lives Matter, with
yeah,
our mums and our dads and our more like, especially I think even so as women, when it comes to like relationships and stuff, where we're just like, you can't say these things thinking that it's okay because you have been indoctrinated for so many years to think so. My dad is dark skinned, my mom's what they used to call fair skinned, which we are now also learning, like we need to unlearn saying fair skinned. And it was always like you just hear it growing up, oh, don't go into the sun, don't go this, don't go that. And, and now we're getting to an age where we have conversations with our parents, our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents, and trying to teach them, hey, look, you love me, you love dad, but dad's dark skin, and Indian, but it could also be darker skin and non-Indian, and it's the same. It's the same thing.
I
But it's
know.
uncomfortable conversations at home, but so important. And I think you vocalizing what you're vocalizing plays a huge part in that. We are coming to the last few minutes, and I really want you to talk to us about the final section that we have every week, which we call homework, which is not really homework. It's more fun than homework. But talk me through some material that we could look into that you find really helpful or entertaining. Not helpful, but entertaining.
Cool. So I think most of mine's kind of nerdy. Like I think like with all the Black Lives Matter stuff and things that are going on, I feel like I don't watch things to relax anymore. I'm like I need to educate myself as much as possible. So there's some good stuff here, but hopefully useful. One of them is what I've already mentioned, I think, which is Angela Sani. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's got a book called The Superior Race, The Return of Race Science, which was recommended to me by that MP who I mentioned earlier when I was doing the Mixed Race Faces project in Parliament. And basically, it's this really interesting book that's looking at how race was basically made up and how it's been purported to us as this kind of like biological genetic thing. And that's complete nonsense. Like race is not real in any sense at all. You know, culture is real in the sense that, you know, we've got different cultures and different backgrounds, but that's been made up by humans, right? But there's nothing concrete about the concept of race. So she really like methodically goes through in this book, talking to various different experts and people about how race is just really something that's been highly constructed, something that has been done under the guise of science, but it's actually something highly politicized, which has led to obviously things, for example, like, you know, the rise of the Nazis and the Holocaust and stuff like that. And she also explores how race science hasn't quite gone away. So we all think that it ended in the 40s and 50s or whatever, when you know Hitler was defeated and that was the end of race science. But actually, like, it's still creeping around, and we have seen recently people piping up a lot about eugenics and stuff like that. So I think it's a really, really interesting book that will completely smash like people's views on race and this idea that race is something innately real. Like it's not. We've actually just completely made it up, which blew my mind and made me feel really stupid because I was like, why do I believe race is real all this time? But it's an excellent book. I'd also recommend the book as well, called Utopia for Realists, which is a little bit more cheery, gives us an opportunity, I suppose, to be hopeful. And it's basically this idea that, you know, we should be dreaming for, you know, a utopian world where we shouldn't be just accepting the scraps on the table. What we need to really push for living in a more innovative world and transform the world that we live in. So it's written by, I think he's Dutch, a guy called Rutger Bregman, really amazing guy. And yeah, he's basically brought to the fore some really interesting ideas around like universal basic income. So this idea that, like, you know, we can all just get a certain amount of money to live on, and then we don't have to work ourselves to death in order to survive, and lots of other really interesting, innovative ideas as well that we could put in place, you know, if enough of us want it to happen, and that we could be living in a utopia if we really want to. The other few bits as well, a couple of documentaries. I would say the documentary Skin is really, really good on Netflix. That's a documentary looking at colorism, which again is a kind of like niche look into, I suppose, racism, or it's the sister of racism, I think people sometimes say, specifically within kind of the Black community. So it's a documentary focusing on you know, the use of skin bleaching, for example, and it's really sad and disheartening, but at the same time really, really important. And it's important that we understand that, you know, there are people literally damaging their skin to be worthy of marriage, or to improve their job prospects, or you know, to be able to earn more money, which is really, really sad, but really interesting. I also think as well, there is another Netflix series, which was really good. Probably will enrage a lot of people because there's so much injustice in it. But it's something called Trial by Media, and it's like a 4 or 5 part series, which is looking at various different real like court events. So one of them is like a rape case. One of them is a case of a white guy who shot like 4 unarmed Black teenagers on a New York subway, and basically picks apart like the legal system and how the legal system in America like deals with these types of really awful difficult issues. And yeah, I think I'll recommend as well one podcast, which is, and you mentioned it already, which is the I May Destroy You series, but there's a podcast that goes with it as well that's really, really cool. It breaks down like everything in I May Destroy You, like lots of themes and like interesting bits, because it's such a like great series that really looks at so many interesting important issues like, you know, sexual consent, racism, all this stuff, and how it intersects together, how we view Black people on screen. So yeah, it was really, really interesting. And if you're like hungry for more after I May Destroy You, like listen to the podcast because you'll get some juicy bits and insights from that too. And that's it.
A great list of books and another podcast to look into. I want to thank you. This was super insightful. I've learned some stuff as well, which, I mean, that sounds like I normally don't learn. I do learn things, but I enjoy it even more when I'm like provided with new information that I had no idea of. Where can we keep up with you and Naked Politics and Mixed Race Faces?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram. I'm just at Banseka, Banseka. You can follow Naked Politics as well. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Naked Politics. And also Mixed Race Faces as well. You can find them on Instagram too, at Mixed Race Faces. I'm sure will be one line as well. And you can keep up to date with everything that they're doing, which is really, really fantastic as well. Really interesting stories. They release a story like every day. So really interesting.
Churning out that content. Banseka, thank you so much for everything today. Please keep doing what you do, and hopefully I'll see more of you.
Thank you for having me.